Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to this meeting. We are going to present you this summer university that has been organized by the Lewis University. It is a unique occasion for you students to meet an international group of students and professors and experts in different fields. It is a unique occasion to study in a different manner because our approach is focused on topics, and our approach is not only academic, but it has also the peculiarity to um, put together different approach from economy, sociology, and therefore it gives a broader view of issues, contemporary issues. It is extremely interesting to tackle topics that goes from management to the Mediterranean issues. This is our case. Our summer school it lasts 2 weeks, and there are many opportunities to go deeper in social and economic issues concerning the Mediterranean nowadays and the Middle East. Today, we will start tackling the topic of the COVID and post-COVID situation in the Mediterranean, South and East Mediterranean. I published an article that you can read on Lewis Open. It concerns COVID situation, but not what's going on now, but how it was this situation right before. And I was just taking into account different elements considering the political situation, and I was thinking that in the last decades we have assisted to the Arab upsurge and the dramatic civil wars going on in Syria and in Libya, still in Yemen. And this was due to the fact that there was no power shift in these countries for many decades. Another problem with those countries which leave the experience of the Arab revolts, where due to the economic crisis, to the difficulties in overcoming this crisis because of the widespread corruptions, and at the same time, another important element in the among the causes that brought to the Arab revolts was the youth bulge, and at the same time the difficulties to leave their own countries in order to study or to work abroad, since there was not offered important opportunities in their countries. What is also an interesting topic to look at the moment is what is the role of Arab Gulf countries in the Mediterranean, and how does it affect the development of more conservative political groups. And another important element that appears in the Mediterranean at the moment is the important investment coming from China, and the appearing of a new political role played by Russia in the Mediterranean after a moment of disappearance and this important political country, political approach to the Mediterranean, and now we will we will listen to the analysis of our colleagues, which will discuss the topic of the COVID in the Middle East and Mediterranean countries. We will start from the Atlantic Mediterranean with Morocco, with Dr. Hashas, who is a colleague of the Lewis. He's teaching Mediterranean studies, and he will be also teaching at the Summer University. Please, Dr. Hashas, so would you please take the floor?
Thank you very much, Professor Corrao, for having me in this webinar. Hello, everyone, and hello, colleagues participating in this seminar. Well, my reflections will be based on the Moroccan case, and from which I'll also make some international remarks about this pandemic, which is historic, and not only unprecedented in the last uh, 40 to 30 years of using the internet. I can say first, and you know, that the coronavirus 19 has touches immensely at least some four major aspects, and these are made 4 points I will make. The first one is the economic side, and I'm not an economist, but we are obliged to take care of the economic side, especially in this period of international lockdown. And then the effects on politics, local politics, and people and civil society. And then I will say something about the cultural and the religious side of the COVID and its impact on society. And I reflect then conclude with some international aspects. In terms of economics, for students who may not know some numbers but may know the geography, Morocco has a population of some 36 million population, and some 5 million outside the country, mostly in Europe and North America and the rest of the world. Its economy is mostly linked to Europe, which is a historical ally in this regard, and it is considered also with the EU a strategic partner, which makes it also difficult in this period because Western Europe, or at least some important countries in Western Europe, like Italy, France, and Spain, and for Morocco, France and Spain are the major economic partners, but the market is the EU in general. So what impacts the EU impacts Morocco substantially. Though for the last couple of years there has been opening to Chinese economy, and for example in 2017, 2.5% of the exports of Morocco went to China, and the imports reached some $3 billion. While in neighboring countries, the exports to China in Algeria, for example, were 1.8%, which is less compared to Morocco, and the Tunisian exports were 1.1%. And Algeria is the country with which one can make comparisons in North Africa and the Maghreb, because the population more or less and the economy they're close, though the Algerian one depends a lot on the hydrocarbon market, I mean the fuel market. Well, these countries, or the Maghreb in general, shares a lot, has a lot in common, and the pandemic has made it difficult for these countries in particular. If we consider the inequality index, for example, in Morocco rates 40%, while in Algeria it's 35%, and in Tunisia 40%. So the highest is Morocco and Tunisia. And the unemployment rate is also high in the country. Morocco in focus, like 21%. In the last couple of months before the pandemic. while it is 30 and 34 in Nigeria and Tunisia. And the lockdown has made the numbers increase substantially because of the informal economy and a lot of unemployed have gone into a more precarious situation. So why is Morocco will face more difficulties in the coming months and maybe very few years as all other countries? Is that first because of this the economic interdependence with the EU market in particular, which is affected by the virus, and because of the sector of tourism on which Morocco depends a lot. It expects some 11 million tourists every year, and with this situation, the number will be much less than now. It will also try to increase, as Italy, for example, does depend on coming months on local tourism or national tourism, but we'll see how it turns out. And it also Morocco depends on remittances, seeing that it has a substantial number of its population, first and second generation of immigrants residing in Europe in particular. And since everyone is impacted, so these remittances would be less, which means that the presence or the entry of the euro or the international money currency, euro or the dollar, will be less in the Moroccan budget in simplistic terms, which will impact later on international attraction of international investment. So these are major sectors, and with that, with tourism and remittances, with the tourism in particular, there is air and sea transport in which Morocco plays an important role because of its place in the Mediterranean, because it's also a transit for a number of sub-Saharan African countries. So a lot of air and sea transport goes through Morocco to reach other parts of Africa, and that will be that is impacted and will have economic consequences. The same thing applies to the agricultural sector and the phosphate exports, on which Morocco is an internationally leading expert. And this again impacts also, as I said, the informal economy, which is important in the country, but it is now affected substantially. How has the country tried to face this? There was first, the country went into a full lockdown immediately after the cases increased in Italy. And the first two cases of the coronavirus were from Italy, from Bologna and from Bergamo, in the first days of March. And by mid-March, so it means some 5 days or 1 week after Italy, there was a full lockdown in the country, and which has saved it from the high rate of contagion in terms of numbers and casualties. That's why so far the country, the cases of contagion are 8,800, and the deaths are 212. So, which means in international numbers, it's very low number, and the recovery cases in percentage reach 91%. And Morocco has also one of the reasons why is because of the lockdown, immediate lockdown, one of the first to do that in the region and the Arab world, and also because the country also decided to use the chloroquine, which was proposed by the professor in Marseille in France, and it has given effects as doctors or the services in the country say. So these are the general. This is the general situation. Immediately after the lockdown, there was a creation of an emergency fund in which the sovereign, the king, and the economic elite in the country contributed, which contributed in the first weeks and collected a good sum of money to be used in supporting the economy and the informal economy, in particular, and the poor families, uh, including the ones not registered in the social registry registrar. And um, so that's the generally the what I can say about the economic factor. Uh, and generally, there is kind of socio-economic kind of control of the situation compared to some other countries in the region. But there is again fear that in the coming weeks and few years, the situation may not be uh, as stable if this lesson of the virus is not learned from to take care of others. Another point that I will be returned to, which is social kind of distribution of fair distribution of the wealth in the country, which is the gap between the rich and the poor is very big. So, besides these institutional aspects of the country that the state and its institutions have done, there has been politically satisfaction by the masses, by the Moroccans, about how the state responded in protecting the life of the population. Everyone got engaged, and the army and the police with their different types were used to enforce the lockdown, and which was then respected. There were few cases that were not respectful of that in the first day, but afterwards it went under control. Um, but when so there is kind of this respect for state intervention, which is swift and respected, but there is also some kind of questioning that goes on until now that the sovereign, the king, did not give a speech to the population to describe the situation or to talk of kind of to be optimist about the future and how the state is intervening in this. So, though the measures that were taken are always under his control and by his initiative, like the emergency fund was his creation and he was the first to contribute to it, but the absence of a formal speech, direct speech to the population has remained noted until now. And people and political commentators are still also wondering about this absence of sovereign voice in such a delicate situation of the country's history and economic situation. So then this the economic side interplays or intertwines with the political side. So now there is fear. There are some backlashes in freedom of expression in the country before the pandemic, and there is now fear that this pandemic emergency may also even increase the level of this backlash. Maybe journalists will not be allowed to open files or cases about social justice, about the distribution of the funds, etc. So there is that fear and that question that freedom of expression is under threat because there are already backlashes that happened before this pandemic. To this, the political parties have reacted, but civil society has also been active. Everyone has been using for the internet, but there has been limited kind of presence in society because anyway there was the need to reach to the poor, to the ones in need, and to make the major services going on. Uh, Civil society has been active again in this and has shown maturity, high level of maturity and solidarity aspect. And this will also, I'll refer to it when I speak about culture and religion. For example, apart besides the other aspect of the state intervention, which was supported by individual cases or some associations, is that they started fabricating the masks and ventilators. So a lot of factories started immediately providing for the local market the masks and ventilators. So there was no need to wait for foreign aid, which is also another reason why there was social satisfaction about the way institutions reacted. Um, um, as to then I moved to say something about culture and religion. You know, this pandemic happened, and then after some weeks, from the 20th of April to the 20th of May, the month of Ramadan arrived, and it is the first time that mosques, Ramadan is a particular month for Muslims and for spiritual retreat, for also socializing at night, etc., and for more solidarity work, for more giving alms and charity for the poor. So the fact that it coincided with this pandemic, this the debate about the role of religion and spirituality was also underlined. And whenever there was talk about a need for sacrifice for the poor, etc., this the month of Ramadan was invoked as a source of inspiration. Um, there was formal education, for example, platforms, and since we are talking about religion and culture, one of the first issues that were tackled is how do religious scholars react to such moments in human history, and how did religious scholars react to pandemics in the past in Moroccan society, for example. So there were all scholars coming to the fore to organize seminars online.
Very well. Very well. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Mohammed. Maybe we can go back to this. Let's listen also to the other colleague. Thank you very much. Odetta Pizzingrilli. Now she's a postdoctoral research fellow at Lewis. She will tell us about Jordan. So we see another scene in the Middle East now. Go ahead. Take the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor. Good evening, everyone. And I'm glad to be here and to have this chance to get a better understanding of this very difficult, sensitive phase we are all living, and of course with especially in the MENA region. So I will focus on the Jordanian case, and I will try to give you a very brief overview. The structure I imagine is very similar to the structure of Mohammed, so I will address the political and economic effect of the COVID-19 crisis, and then I would like to focus a little bit on the education response to the crisis of the Jordanian government. To start, I will briefly retrace the Jordanian response, starting from the beginning of March, when the first case was confirmed by the Ministry of Health. In Jordan, the medical system is not prepared to accommodate the fast influx of patients. In fact, hospitals only have 1.4 beds for 1,000 inhabitants, which is lower than the global average. That's why the response, the immediate response of the government was particularly harsh, strict. Maybe one of the world's strictest measures. Schools were suspended, public gatherings banned, and they closed the borders, the airports. And then in the middle of March, the government implemented the plan to quarantine arrivals to the country. So people coming from abroad were housed in the Dead Sea resorts for a period of 2 weeks. Then a lockdown was announced. During the lockdown that lasted 4 days, people were not allowed to go outside. And the lockdown was later turned into a strictly enforced curfew. So citizens could go out only by foot, walking. Cars were not allowed from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. These strict measures apparently worked. To date, the government confirmed only 915 cases, of which 671 recovered and 9 deceased. For a country of nearly 10 million people, there are really low numbers. At the beginning of June, the curfew was eased. Now it's only from midnight to 6 a.m. and it is possible to move within the country's governorates. So when talking about Jordan in general, and when addressing the consequences of the COVID crisis, the most interesting, significant aspect to be dealt with, according to me, is the country ongoing quest for legitimacy that touches both the economic and the political issues. In the words of Betty Anderson, the Hashemites had literally to imagine the state, because no such entity called Jordan existed before the establishment of its boundaries and administrative structures in 1921. So we can say that the Hashemites' quest for legitimacy has been ongoing ever since, from the very foundation of the kingdom. Legitimacy sources for the country, for the ruling elite, for the nation state overall are mostly kingship, so tribal bonds, religion, so Islam, and the semi-ranger economic system on which the country is based. So as for the tribal bonds, it is interesting, I think, to remember to quote the words of King Abdullah II in his speech on the 23rd of March. He addressed the nation and called the citizens my brothers and sisters, my family, my people, and my source of fortitude. Each and every one of you is a soldier of this nation, each in your own post. So he refers to Jordanians using this kind of vocabulary, brothers and sisters and family, my people, the same he did in 2014 when he used the word my family and my larger tribe to refer to the Jordanian people. As for the most important maybe aspect now, so the economic aspect, we can define Jordan as a semi-rentier state or a rentier state of second order, because it is highly dependent on external sources of income, namely the budgetary support of the Gulf countries and the Western development aid. This can be considered rent equivalent. In this sense, political power and domestic sovereignty and foreign policy in Jordan are linked to this fragile and over-reliant socio-economic system. So it is it comes natural to ask ourselves what will happen, what will be the consequences of this crisis, of these strict measures that really put on hold the economy, already fragile economy of the country. Even before the pandemic, 15.7% of the Jordanians lived under the poverty line and 19% of them were unemployed. If we look at the Jordanian youth, the rate climbed to almost 40%. Moreover, informal workers constitute around 46% of the Jordanian labor force and 25% of the national income. And we know that, of course, informal workers are the ones that are suffering and will suffer more the effect of the crisis. Only 31% of the Jordanian workers can work from home, but almost 60% are not working at all. This will worsen the situation because many people are pushed out of the formal labor market, and this decrease the tax revenue. Decreasing the tax revenues, the government will not be able to fund policies that would have a result in improvement of public services like health, education, social welfare, generally speaking. And we already saw in 2018 that when the social welfare is in danger in Jordan, people arise. To conclude this part, Jordan also has 1.76 billion US dollars in debt payments to make this year. This means that Jordan will be forced to borrow more. So the cost of its already expensive public debt will increase. Moreover, the security of Jordan's supply will be threatened because nearly a third of Jordan's imports come from the countries with the highest COVID-19 infection rates, like China, US, Germany, also Italy. And the foreign aid that we, as we said, it constitute a big part of the country GDP, also will decrease because all the countries are facing some economic crisis. So maybe we have to think that maybe Jordan will have to drift away from its semi-rentierism, from its semi-renter system. Maybe there will be a drastic change in the economic orientation of the country before the foreign funds dry up. It is possible that this coronavirus crisis will serve as a wake-up call, triggering a really a deep rethinking of the economic system. The second aspect I would like to touch is the political aspect that I think is very interesting, and it starts from asking which was the entity that was primarily responsible for enforcing the curfew. So the police, the Jordan police, and in some cases the military, were the primary enforcers of the COVID-19 policies, while the bureaucracy and other political bodies like municipalities, mayors, or governorate council appear to play a minor or non-existent role in enforcing the defense orders. Why this is significant according to me? Because according to the Arab Barometer survey, Jordanians consistently trust the military more than either elected or appointed official. The trust in the parliament and government has declined significantly since 2007, while more than 90% expressed trust in the military in 2019. So the worsening of the economic conditions and the new role assumed by the military within this crisis may have implication for the Jordanian politics. In fact, there was a trend even before the COVID outbreak that many Jordanians start to think that the coercive military apparatus can be more trusted to take care of business than the civil state. So in the post so-called Arab Spring era that preceded the pandemic, there was a tendency among Jordanians, mainly tribal Jordanians, toward the nationalist right-wing politics. Adopted by populist Jordanian politicians. This neo-tribal right wing built its narrative on economic and social complaints against the neoliberal approach of the ruling elite. And now with the military and the police playing a central role in the very successful containment of the coronavirus in Jordan, maybe these right-wing sympathizers may see in this crisis a validation exercise for their political reform. So it is not unreasonable to believe that the worsening economy will drive more Jordanians into the populist camp and call for more military intervention in governance.
Thank you. Odetta. And now I would give the floor to Cenap Aydin, who is the Deputy Secretary General of the Jacques Maritain International Institute. Sorry, we were a bit long, so now a very short time. But okay.
No
Go ahead, Cenap, please.
Thank you, Professor Corrao. Thank you, Luis, for this opportunity. I'm very happy to hear the Moroccan and Jordanian experiences. Of course, Turkey is a particular case, being at the crossroads between Europe and the Middle East, and between European Union and Central Asia, and also, between Russia, China, and Africa. So we have a particular attention for this country. I'm just trying to give some very quick reflections on the Turkish case, related to the COVID-19 crisis. At the beginning in Turkish society, at the state level, actually the crisis was not taken very seriously. But then afterwards, there was a huge attention to that, especially at the medical level. But Turkey opted for a different lockdown style. Actually, they didn't go toward the full lockdown, but they preferred to having just on the weekends, some particular days, and putting a total ban for people who are more than 65 years old, and then just trying to a little bit differentiate this lockdown depending on the also provinces of the country, because as you know, at the beginning of the crisis, at the beginning of March, the COVID-19 crisis was overwhelmingly present in Istanbul. Almost 60% of the infected people were in Istanbul. That was that's the city, as you know very well, this is the political, economic, and cultural capital of country. I mean, I say also political, not only just referring to Ankara is much more the administrative capital. I'm using this term much more consciously because also it's interesting enough the president of Turkey also preferred to stay in Istanbul rather than in Ankara during the crisis. My very short reflections are related to, first of all, the question of human rights. As you know very well, in Turkey, there are millions of Syrian refugees living in some not very well conditions, and they also risked so much during the crisis, living in overcrowded places. And there's a special attention, again, the COVID-19 crisis about the Roma community. There is a very high percentage of infection among people, the nomadic people in Turkey. Another question, again, related to human rights, of course, the prisoners. As you know very well, in Turkey, there is a problem of overcrowdedness of the prisons. And there was a huge debate about that, to release so many prisoners so that they cannot be infected. But at the end, unfortunately, some of the leading figures of organizational crime have been released, but so many political prisoners, foremost the Kurdish leadership from the deputies who were prisoned, they were not released from the Turkish prisons. And that, again, created a huge debate in the public sphere. Another issue, of course, the solidarity and the civil society. The Turkish state tried to respond to crisis, but as you know very well, Turkey has been, just going through an economic crisis since the beginning of this year, before the COVID-19. That's why that COVID-19 crisis a little bit just made it worse. But in Turkish society, as we have already heard in the case of Morocco, especially during Ramadan, there was a huge increase in the solidarity, especially through the mobilization of the civil society, and people try to help each other, especially in this moment of a particular crisis. Back to the more geopolitical questions. At the beginning, I was trying to say the very strategic position of Turkey and the Eastern Mediterranean region, and a bridge country between European Union, Middle East, and Central Asia, and just linked to that Russia and China. In this moment, the Turkish position vis-a-vis the international questions had been also very much into the scene. Just because the COVID-19 did not stop the Turkish intervention in Eastern Mediterranean issues around Cyprus and again Libya, always vis-a-vis other actors in the region. Maybe the last point I would like to add, what that will be more interesting to conclude this short reflection on Turkish case around COVID-19. This crisis actually brought up again the emergence of a new, I would say, opposition voices again in Turkey, because in the political arena since 2016 there is a huge, I would say, consolidation of the political power of the actual government. But now, due to the political and economic turmoil, after during the COVID-19 crisis, also the opposition parties and leaders have started creating new strategies to offer new approach for the future of Turkish politics. Thank you very much for the invitation again.
Thank you very much. Now we leave the floor to Shirin Zakeri, who is a research fellow of University La Sapienza in Rome.
Okay.
Please.
Thank you very much for inviting me to this very interesting webinar. Well, I will go directly to my topic, otherwise we don't have very much time for the questions. So as the other colleagues explained about the situations in the COVID in the MENA region, I have to say in the Middle East, of course, the situation is also relative in on the other factors, and not just the crisis of the COVID, because the other countries like Syria, Iraq, or the conflict zones, or the problems of the refugees make more worse the situations even before the COVID. So by the COVID, basically the situation gets more critical. And I'm going to talk at the beginning. I'm going to talk about Iran, and then I will put some challenging and some analyzing the steps about other countries. Basically, Iran was one of the first countries in the Middle East to have the first cases of the coronavirus in mid-February in the city of Qom, which is the holy city for the Shia Muslims. 2 people have been confirmed officially to be infected by COVID-19. And from this city, basically, it's just 1 hour far from Tehran. And from this city, the virus, it was started to be expanded in the other cities, from first in Tehran, in the capital, and then in the north of Iran, which the situation becomes very critical, and the emergency of the healthcare system, of Iranian healthcare system, it becomes very difficult situations. From the 5th March, all educational institutions in the country have been closed, and religious, cultural, and sporting events have been cancelled. A partial lockdown placed basically since 25th March, with all non-essential business required to close and travel suspended between the provinces in the country. However, due to the economic difficulties caused by the lockdown, and not just also because of the US sanctions against the Iranian nuclear activities from when the Trump left the JCPOA agreements in 2018, Iranian governments couldn't really today, during the COVID situations, apply the full lockdown. And these situations, in fact, they caused a very high inflation in the country, and a very serious economic problems for the Iranian government. By the way, the Iranian government announced on 8 April that 2/3 of low-risk activities can start to be open. And beside of the solutions for the economic situation to open the markets and Iranian economic activities, almost 1,000 prisoners, 100,000 prisoners benefited from the temporary liberations from their jail until 20 May. And at the end of April, the government disclosed its deconfinement strategy. The plan divided the country into white, yellow, and red regions based on the number of confirmed cases and deaths. In white regions, religious gatherings have been allowed to resume, and the government announced on 3rd May the schools and mosques could be reopened. But still today, the schools and universities are still closed, and Iran is facing the second wave of the coronavirus, which is in the south of the city, south of the Iran, and it's very serious and very much aggressive. Today, almost 200,000 people are affected, have been affected by the coronavirus, but unfortunately, in Iran, there is also the problem of the transparency from the beginning about the real numbers of the people who they had this problem of the coronavirus. And we could say in the Middle East, many countries started to introduce strict containment measures from the first half of the March. And notably, many countries did not wait to have confirmed cases to start imposing movements, restrictions, and social distancing measures. For example, Saudi Arabia, for instance, suspended the pilgrimage to the Mecca and Medina in the early February. And most of the countries are starting to close the schools and nursery and prohibiting large public gatherings, including religious ones. In the Middle East, many countries have been suffering even before the COVID from the low health expenditures, human resource shortages in the healthcare sector, and lack of medical equipment, especially for the countries maybe suffering, perhaps they are suffering fragility and conflict. The COVID-19 outbreak poses a major challenges given damages to the health system. In emergency settings where availability of water, sanitations, and hygiene services is scarce, applying preventive measures to limit the spread of the disease create a very difficult situations. For example, we could talk about the Palestinian territory, especially in the Gaza Strip or refugees camps in Syria or Lebanon. Lebanon has the largest numbers of the refugees with respect of its populations in a worldwide, and houses approximately 1.7 million refugees, including 1.5 million from Syria. In another fact, countries where healthcare facilities have been partially destroyed during the war and governance remain extremely fragile and uncoordinated in certain areas, and lack the necessary capacity to respond to the crisis in terms of the medical facility, equipment, or personnel, especially when we talk about Syria. For example, WHO estimated that 70% of the healthcare workers have left the country and as migrants or refugees. So while only 64% of hospitals and 52% of primary health care centers remains fully operational. And the problems, so it became very serious in those areas. Instead of all these problems, by the way, many governments in Iraq, in Iran, even in Syria, they, especially for the Kurdish part, they adopted the measures to ensure the continuity of the public service. In countries where confinement measures were imposed, teleworking arrangements and online tools have been developed to facilitate the ongoing functioning of the public administrations, also the TV programs for the educational systems. Another impact which basically has created problems, it was or it is still the oil prices. The most of the countries in the Middle East, in Gulf area, Persian Gulf area, their economy is dependent on the oil. So the COVID pandemic basically and related confinement measures caused very big challenges about the oil prices, and it was this result was one of the biggest prices shock in the energy market in history. We could say about the protest in Lebanon for the economic crisis, and in fact, bottom crude oil prices put additional strain on even the region's wealthiest countries in the Persian Gulf, like as Qatar, Kuwait, or Saudi Arabia. For including my part, basically some countries from the last month, from the May almost, they started to have the exit strategy. The confinement plans disclosed so far, like I said, either progressive, such as the Lebanese 5 steps reopening plan, which started on 27th April, to rely on a geographical breakdown between the low risk and high risk region, as it is in the case of Iran, which has been divided into white, yellow, and red areas. I have already noted about that, based on the numbers of confirmed case and death. So I include my part here if there is any questions. Thank you.
Okay, let's hope we only have 3 minutes, which is very little, but I don't see any question here in the chat. No questions. Well, I could ask something to Mohammed, or maybe to Cenap, because he's the one who spoke less. Yes. No, there are no questions. So I would ask just Cenap for these last 2 minutes, because he was the one who spoke less, because Mohammed was picking up the discussion about the different opinions of people in reaction to the spread of coronavirus in tradition and nowadays. Different position for, I think, among those who think that it is God punishment, and those who think it is a good chance to think about welfare. What would you say?
Well, actually, yeah, this is also very much discussed in the Turkish public sphere, because, you know, religion and politics are always very intertwined in the Turkish political arena. So, I mean, of course, there have been several different approaches there, but the Turkish religious authority, Diyanet, avoided actually this debate, and they didn't want to actually give a concrete answer to that. But some religious leaders tried to a little bit, I mean, just catch the, I would say, opportunity to politicize this issue. I mean, giving some religious explanation to that. But besides that, I would say, of course, that the Turkish society, there is, that will be that's something that should be observed. In recent years, we observe, as sociologists of religion, a very high level of secularization. So, on the one level, there is this religious discourse was empowered, and then just so many reflections on that. But also, especially among young people, there is a reaction actually against this, I will say, religious discourse about COVID-19 crisis. So I would say maybe in the upcoming time, we will see more clashes and conflicts from religious and secular standpoints in Turkey, not only on COVID-19, but several other political, cultural issues of the country.
Yeah, that is very interesting. Maybe Mohammed want to say something about that. I can't hear you. Okay.
Yeah, I wanted to add a note that makes the debate at the national or regional level an international thing, as it truly is, because it is a world pandemic and it has touched everyone. And now everyone in the future, after 50 years, 80 years, can remember what happened in 2019 and 2020. And this issue is mostly existentially oriented, and about the future of humanity in the digital world. We are so much connected now, more than ever, and we will even be more connected. I mean, there has been a lot of works, I mean, articles so far that are written by prominent international philosophers that say that COVID-19 opens a new chapter in human, in our history, modern history, which is true. But the point is whether it will be kind of this good future or bad, or how it will be used. That's the question, which requires our as users of the internet, as users of social media, etc., the digital world, it will require more alertness about how we use it and how our data and freedom is used and is looked at. How would international social engines or use our data when we look at the websites, and why are we receiving certain advertisements when we never applied or to a particular company or never checked a particular brand, etc. So there is a question about freedom and how human beings will react and how free will they be or not, and the impact on that on their intellectual growth or not, and that's at the personal level, and at the social level, that will impact the democratic process. If everything becomes digitalized, where is the human relations, which are an important measure in trusting and not trusting someone, a politician or an intellectual, or a teacher or a professor, etc. Where will we do? What will we do in that absence of human relations? And will technology impact the way we teach, the way we think? So these are questions related to space and time. Will in the future maybe we can have big screens at home, and which we don't need screens anyway, because maybe the house will be so smart that the walls at home will be like a schermo, like a screen. You arrive, and what we see in science fiction will be a reality after some time, sooner or later. So how are we ready to engage with that future? And it's especially negative possible aspect. These are questions that scholars in the Arab world, from philosophers or sociologists, anthropologists, have also written about now, which means it's an international thing that that deserves our attention, apart from the economic side and its impact. So I think it's yeah, we'll have a lot to think about.
There is a question coming from Silvia Borge. She's asking, coronavirus is only another opportunity to ask ourselves the most asked questions of believers and not believers in the course of centuries. 2 point. Why does God permit evil? So, who's going to give an answer? Yalla, maybe Cenap?
Please, you
No,
know.
actually, I thought not. Just maybe someone else. I mean, yeah.
Shirin?
No, maybe Mohammed is more expert than me about that.
Well, that's very. I mean, that's a question that everyone asks. I mean, whether you are a believer or not, whether you are rational in your understanding of religion or not, at certain moments you ask this question. And one of the challenges is not to find an answer, but how to go around answering that in a way that gives some satisfaction. It's not about accusing God of forgetting the world, or saying that this is purely human and human have to face it. There is nature is such a mysterious world, and it will keep surprising us. And that's the challenge science will have to respond to. Whether the philosophers who do more theoretical reflections will respond later or react to what science finds or not, that's also another question. But I think we should, if we want to have answers that serve humanity at large, we should keep God away, whether he exists or not, whether he did it or not. I think that's not the question. I think the question is how human beings use it and deal with it. Whether they can use it to learn and help each other, or no, they use it to be more nationalist, to be more closed down, and to be all. Yeah, that's the question. It's not whether you believe this is destiny by divine or not. It's what you do with it, I think.
Yes, maybe we can also use some more minutes. I would say, like in tradition, as far as I know, starting from Quran, of course, there is written that anyway, God is the one who has the power to give life and death, to give laughter and cry. So, of course, a human being cannot. Wonder why evil is happening. This is within the mind of God, and it is not up to us to inquire. While, as you say, and I agree, the position is what do you do when an evil is happening? So, how do you react? Because this is on human opportunity to react contrasting evil or supporting evil. But coming to nowadays, what happened is that some very radical extremists picked up this event of COVID, saying that it was God punishment because of our earthly corruption. It is quite tragic, but this answer, which we could read in a paper of extremists, of Muslim extremists today, we would find it in the Middle Age among Christians at the time of the Black Peace, for instance. So it is. It has always happened in the world that in front of a disaster, a human being start asking why I'm going to face this difficulty. And of course, in the monotheistic tradition, since God is the only one responsible for whatever happens, is the first one to be interviewed. But it is very correct, also from the Sufi point of view, is how to react to reality and take the occasion to get closer to divine understanding of what's going on. Isn't it like that, Cenap? What do you think?
Yeah, okay. Just, I mean, I really appreciate what you're saying. Yes, I mean, now also, as you know very well, there is this all spreading through the internet, the different practices of, I will say, the Sufi meetings, mindfulness. I will see actually how Hindus, Buddhists, and Muslim Sufis interacting each other with also Christian monks. This is actually a very interesting way of looking at the things, as you were saying. I mean, looking at a tragedy, looking at something, I mean, seem to be evil, but then you're just with a different view, you actually transform that event is something that you can actually appreciate and just putting into your lifespan and something that you make you, I would say, a better person, just getting through this crisis. I think that would be maybe something that we can learn altogether, especially also studying this new phenomenon of, I would say, the virtual mindfulness and the Buddhist, Hindu, and Muslim Sufi practices. What I'm actually observing that they are just, I mean, giving this vision of the Weltanschauung in which that we can transform the crisis into something meaningful for our lives.
Yeah. Are there any other questions? Yes. Sylvia thanks the panelists and replies, also in Islam, there is the concept of hayr, which goes beyond our comprehension and evaluation of the things we go through in this life. Thank you very much. Okay. If there are no more questions, maybe we could thank very much our colleagues and our public, and I hope to meet all of you at the summer university. We will have, in fact, I invite Cenap and Shirin to this meeting. We will have in the occasion of the summer university on religious dialogue between not only the three monotheistic, but between religious and non-religious in the Islamic world. Starting from a very interesting article written by Cenap Aydin about, in fact, dialogue, because usually what is extremely important, and still is extremely important, is the religious dialoguing among themselves. What is more difficult, especially in the Islamic world, is, but also in the Christian world, the dialogue between those who believe and those who do not believe, which is a very, very difficult to accept from both sides. I mean, a religious person cannot understand somebody who does not believe, and vice versa. Let's say somebody who's very strictly anchored to the revolution of the Enlightenment in the 18th centuries cannot accept the idea that there is somebody who's still believing in God. So that would be nice to discuss and find out good opportunity to overcome the difficulties in this sort of dialogue, because then it becomes a difficulty in dialogue between East and West, between the secular and the religious, and these and other topics we'll be discussing about in our summer university, as our friends say, inshallah, if God wants. So thank you very much, Odetta Pizzingrilli. Thank you very much, Shirin Zakeri. Thank you very much, Mohammed Hashas, and thank you very much, Cenap Aydin, and thank you very much to our dear public. Bye bye. Have a good afternoon.
you.
Bye bye.
Thank you.